I know Twitter is committing massive advertising fraud and has been for years. Again, I have this background in ad tech. There's a ton of fraud in ad tech. So that's another similarity to the Web3 kind of ecosystem between there and ad tech that I didn't mention earlier. But, these kind of nascent and emerging spaces are often wrought with fraud, right? So I knew Twitter was committing massive ad fraud, and I wanted to sort of like really highlight that, hey, like Twitter says that they have systems in place that are going to remove all these inauthentic accounts, but reality is it's kind of not happening.
Hey there, good people in crypto land. I'm Matt Leising, and this is my podcast, Decent People. Welcome to the conversation. On the show today, I am speaking with Geoff Golberg, who has been fighting the good fight against Twitter manipulation for many years. The manipulation comes in lots of forms, from bot accounts to inauthentic users who can swarm around and try to change public opinion. Geoff first got into this fight when a Periscope account that he had was taken offline by the owner of Twitter because Geoff was trying to expose pedophilia that was going on the platform. So he's been in this for a while. He was actually banned from Twitter in 2019 and only just in January of this year got back on the platform. So he's fighting the good fight. He's using Web3 to map and kind of visualize how these bot armies work through his firm that he co-founded called Social Forensics. Before that, Geoff was a high school athlete and was getting into tech and entrepreneurship from an early age. So we speak about that, and we speak about Twitter under Jack Dorsey versus Twitter under Elon Musk, and about how Web3 and blockchain might have a potential here to help solve some of these social media issues. So with all that said, let's get to the show, and I hope you enjoy it. Thanks a lot. Hey, Geoff, how's it going?
Doing well, Matt. How about yourself?
Yeah, really good. It's so great to talk to you. It's been a little while, and I thought I should start off by just welcoming you back to the infernal hellscape that is Twitter. I know you've been off the platform for a while, not of your own volition, but I'm wondering if maybe you are regretting your life choices now that you're back on Elon Musk's Twitter platform.
Thanks for welcoming me back. I appreciate that. It's sort of like a mixed bag, to be perfectly honest. On the one hand, so taking a step back, I was deplatformed in July 2019, and my account was reinstated January 31st, 2023. So it's been quite some time.
Wow.
And, I really felt that it sounds in some ways probably silly to say, but, I was totally rugged of my voice. For me, Twitter has been an incredibly powerful platform in terms of the people across the world that I've been able to connect to, sort of both on a personal and a professional level. So, and that sort of spans from journalists to the work that I do. It's really useful to be able to use Twitter, to connect to people across the world, right? So this stuff has, like I said, it's great to have my voice back, but on the other hand, the anxiety levels, have increased for sure. I can certainly say that. I'm
Yes.
trying to sort of strike a nice balance between, should I keep the app on my phone or not? Maybe limiting certain hours. It's easy to fall into this trap where every time you get sort of a notification on Twitter, that you want to immediately reply, and I think that's not a healthy place to be.
I've been there. I've taken it off my phone. I've tried to do certain hours of the day or not on the weekends. I tried this rule where if the first 2 or 3 tweets I saw weren't interesting, I just close it and go away. None of it worked. It's
Well, hopefully
all,
you like Elon Musk, because these days, that's all we sort of seem to be seeing in our For You tabs, right?
yeah. But I guess before we get into your background and everything, if you weren't back on Twitter, you wouldn't have been called the Tehran Terminator, which I thought was pretty funny.
That is true. So, back in 2019, some of these bad actors would sort of, include me in memes. They would kind of call me Ayatollah Goldberg and sort of take some image of me that they found online, and then put sort of one of those religious hats. I don't even know what they're called, to be honest with you. But more recently, sort of from the other side, not the folks who were upset that I was calling out their manipulation, from the folks that have been sort of being impacted by the manipulation. They kind of memed me as the Tehran Terminator, which is pretty funny.
Yeah. Yeah. We will definitely get into that in a little bit. But let's let's go back a little bit, and tell me about your childhood and your upbringing. Where were you raised?
Sure. So I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, about 25 miles east of San Francisco. My parents sort of came to the United States from Russia in the late 70s, and I was born a few years thereafter. So, you know, growing up in the Bay Area, if I were to contrast that to my sort of experience now, it was a big culture shock for me, for example, to go to college in the Northeast. But we can sort of jump into that stuff a bit later. But growing up in the Bay Area, I sort of like I think in some levels seeing sort of the stuff that was happening with the internet, like in the '90s, kind of like made me interested in tech, in venture, in that whole sort of thing. I ended up spending my first year of college studying at UC Berkeley, so I kind of stayed local. And then I transferred to the University of Pennsylvania. And sort of the main driving force in that decision was I wanted to be able to wrestle in college. And Berkeley didn't have a team.
Ah, interesting. So you were in the East Bay. What part of the East Bay did you grow up in?
So I went to a high school that's in Concord that's quite well known for football, in fact. It's called De La Salle. So it's a Catholic LaSallian school. And here I am. My last name is very Jewish, Goldberg. So I guess I have this habit of transferring schools after my first year. I transferred high schools after my freshman year into this one, specifically because I really wanted to play baseball, and they had a great baseball program. They also have a fantastic football program. They may still hold the record for national sort of consecutive games won for a high school football team. There was a movie sort of done on their program, a book written about it,
Oh, wow.
and a number of sort of NFL players that have done quite well, including Maurice Jones-Drew, who I believe was nicknamed Pocket Hercules, came out of the De La Salle program.
Wow, cool. So it seems like you're quite the jock. You wanted to wrestle in college. You were into baseball. Is that something that just came naturally to you as a kid?
So I played sports my whole life. I wouldn't say it came naturally to me. I think, I just have a good work ethic, I think. So, in college, for example, I think I had to work a lot harder than most of my peers with the work that I do currently. I just know how much time I put into this, and I have a high level of confidence that others who are sort of operating in the same space just simply aren't as committed. So it's not that athletics came naturally to me, but I sort of really put in a lot of work, and I had seen a decent amount of success with baseball through my freshman year of high school. But after I made this transfer, I ended up not even playing baseball at this high school that I transferred to play baseball. I had a biology teacher that happened to be the wrestling coach, and he kind of convinced me that I should get into wrestling. And after my sophomore year wrestling, the end of the sort of year, I beat out a senior for the starting spot that had been sort of on the varsity team since his freshman year. So he was really sort of not too pleased by that. But it was sort of at that time that I realized, maybe I should stick to wrestling. So I opted not to play baseball for high school that spring, and instead I competed in freestyle and Greco-Roman wrestling.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
And what was the Bay Area like back then in like the 80s? Because I guess I'm nostalgic for Los Angeles back in that time because it was very different. Seemed a lot less hectic and less crowded. Um, I know the Bay Area has gotten incredibly expensive and people are kind of souring on it in different ways. But what was it like for you back during those
Yeah, I mean,
formative years?
I have fond memories of growing up in the Bay Area, and I think it's also important to kind of acknowledge the Bay Area is incredibly wide ranging, but broadly speaking, I think many people may assume that the Bay Area is just like San Francisco, and I think
Yeah,
these are very different things, right? So
yeah, for sure.
I mean, I grew up watching like the Oakland A's play baseball when they had Dennis Eckersley, Mark McGuire, Ricky Henderson, Jose Canseco. Those are sort of really fun games to go check out. I mean, the Oakland fans are sort of a unique breed, if you will. Um,
You can say that.
yeah.
Were you any chance? I remember I think it was the 1989 World Series, or it was the playoffs. It was the Dodgers and the Giants, I
when
think.
when the bridge collapsed.
Yeah, the earthquake. Yeah. Do you remember that game?
I do. I remember we were watching the game at some family friend's house, and their chimney had kind of cracked. It was
Oh, wow.
just all very surreal. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember watching it on TV in LA, and the camera just kind of jerked, and then I think it went black, and that was it. We had no idea what was going on, but yeah, that was a bad earthquake. So interesting in sports. Like I did a similar thing. I played baseball my whole life, and I was like a pitcher, and I was a pretty good hitter. But I got kind of tired of it in high school, and I switched to playing tennis. So like
Interesting.
you, I went from a team sport to an individual sport.
Hmm.
How did you like that transition? Because it was very different. All of a sudden, you're pretty much you're the only one on the court, or you're the only one in the wrestling ring, and you don't have anybody to fall back on if you're not doing well. Did that ever uh, kind of occur to you?
No, it absolutely did. And I think wrestling and tennis, at the high school level, college level, let's say they're similar in that they are individual sports, but there also are team aspects, right? Like there is still sort of a team score when you're playing against another high school, let's say in wrestling or in
Yeah.
tennis. So, you still have this team aspect, but I kind of appreciated the fact that when you sort of, well, you don't require having any equipment to wrestle, right? Yeah,
Well,
shoes,
you've
I
got those cool
suppose,
ear
but
guards, right? What are those called?
yeah, sort of headset or ear guard. I
Yeah.
think you just call them. I don't even know. I actually didn't use them much in kind of high school nor college practices. They kind of were a bit annoying, frankly. But you're supposed to wear them during competition, so that's why sort of currently I have cauliflower ear, what they call it. A lot of jujitsu people get it, boxers get it, wrestlers get it. Effectively, from your ear constantly just being when you're fighting for position, right?
Yeah,
Your
you're just
opponent
getting
can
smashed around, right? And your ear takes the brunt of it.
precisely it fills up with sort of some liquids and pus, and if you don't get it drained right away, that stuff sort of very quickly becomes solid.
Oh
So
man.
yeah, and sometimes some former wrestlers or boxers, let's say, they may get reconstructive ear surgery, but I think a lot of us sort of look at this as sort of these are war scars. Like when I see somebody on the street that has cauliflower ear, I kind of just respect them because I know that they have a hard work ethic, but B is probably somebody that you don't want to mess with.
Yeah, yeah, good call. um, so I was interested. You said that being in the Bay Area at that time sort of exposed you to tech and venture capital, maybe. Can you just tell me a little bit more about that? What was it that was appealing to you? Was it like the emergence of the internet at that era, at that stage?
Yeah, so in high school, a wrestling teammate of mine who a year older than me, he ended up sort of wrestling at Stanford, pursuing both his undergraduate degree and master's degree in computer science at Stanford. And, it was through him that I kind of, I think really started thinking about the potential of the internet to sort of instantly be able to disseminate information, to connect with people over the world. I think, but even more importantly, just kind of like understanding that if you're one of these search engines and you're sitting on all of this intent data, that's like incredibly powerful. So yeah, obviously there were these search engine wars. There was Alta Vista, Lycos, Dogfish, and so on and so forth. Google, I think, was maybe the 21st or 20 some odd entrant into the market, and that really goes to show that it's not about kind of being first, but it's about getting things right.
Yeah, absolutely. Ask Jeeves is in the graveyard there too, right? Um,
Precisely.
yeah. When did you know, like, so what did you do with that information? Like, what area of it kind of appealed to you, and where did you think you could maybe contribute or fit into that ecosystem?
Um, I just sort of saw it in certain ways as just being like, nascent in sort of like the wild, wild west. And to me, operating in that sort of environment rather than a more rigid or more traditional one uh, seemed interesting. That didn't, sort of this friendship and the discussions I had with this individual didn't sort of push me, let's say, to pursue something like computer science in college. I tried taking a computer science class at Berkeley. In fact, they're kind of their weeder one. which is just notorious for, being quite difficult. And I wasn't suited for it. It just wasn't for me. Initially, I worked in finance, and I was rating CMBS, commercial mortgage-backed securities, at one of the rating agencies. I was at Moody's. I did that for a couple years, and I kind of got out before Lehman and Bear collapse, went down and stuff. And
did you cause the financial crisis, Geoff?
Yes, no, but I did see, how, I would say, very aggressively, many of these assets were being underwritten because the banks, weren't keeping this stuff on their balance sheets, right? So yeah. I just can sort of vividly recall one of my colleagues looking at a deal, Stuytown, for example, which is this like apartment complex, kind of like, it looks like the projects, perhaps, in certain ways.
City. Yep.
Yeah, New York City.
Big.
And they were this was in 2006, 2007. And, they were going to be getting out all of the, I think there was many like rent stabilized, rent controlled tenants in there. And they wanted to do some renovations and then increase the rents. And just the assumptions that were being used in these underwriting models, to me, it just seemed like, it's similar to crypto, in that, when number has been going up for a long time, you sort of start to realize that number is going to be going back down as well. So it seems to be very frothy. Look, had I gotten into CMBS maybe like a decade prior, some of those folks had done extremely well. But for me, it's it was a great first job, in that I recommend all recent college grads, let's say, who maybe have some analytic chops, to take a job working in the financial services, to take a job in management consulting, at one of, if you can at least, Bain, BCG, McKinsey. The skill set that you'll develop will just be invaluable.
Yeah. You mentioned the Wild West aspect of the early internet. Is crypto kind of hitting that same chord for you right now? Do you feel like it's in that same vein?
Yeah, and perhaps even like it's like that, but on steroids.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because here you've got an entire retail contingent that can do pretty much anything they want, and you've got a lot of bad actors, as we've seen over the last couple of years, and basically very little regulation and rules of the road. So what could go wrong, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I most recently, career-wise, so I was in finance kind of initially, but I spent a number of years working in ad tech, and I see a lot of parallels with the ad tech ecosystem, perhaps more particularly what they call the digital display landscape. There's this banker, Terry Kawaja, that does all of the major deals, I would say, within or most of them within the ecosystem. He's a very well-connected, sharp individual. But he kind of, I think, at least as I've seen, now we have all these various ecosystem maps, right? It could be a Web3 data-oriented one. It could be a layer 2 oriented one. But Terry kind of pioneered, I think, these infographics that include company logos. And he did it to describe the digital display landscape. They're called Lumascapes. And it's just an incredibly complex ecosystem. You have so many players, lots of frenemies, if you will. And I think Web3 is very similar in that regard.
Well, can you break that down a little bit more? Just like, what do you mean by ad tech? Are you in the background? Like, are you programming ads or like making, like, what is the technology part of that advertising?
Sure. So, I do have some experience on the search side as well. So search advertising, but most of my experience is on the display side, so kind of graphical ads, if you will. And, like historically, people on the internet visit websites, right? There are cookies that can track, your kind of activity. And as a result, that allows, whether it's a publisher, whether it's an intermediary, so somebody who's has a technology that can help an advertiser gain more ROI on their ads, or help a publisher improve their yield, so their revenue per thousand impressions, for example, right?
Yeah.
You effectively are crunching a lot of data on the user, all anonymized, right? So there's no PII that is usually involved in this space. But you have this ecosystem where you have like third-party brokers that are selling data. So as somebody who may be an ad network, like an intermediary who's working both with the advertisers to optimize their ROI and the publishers to improve their yield, you're sort of leveraging all of this user data that you have to kind of create a profile to be used in advertising context, right? So an analogy in the crypto world is, you could establish based on addresses types of NFTs one transacts with, sort of when you're able to leverage, machine learning, for example, to link addresses that otherwise you wouldn't know are sort of tied together, right?
Yeah.
You can really establish profiles of users on the blockchain in a similar way that kind of has been happening in the Web 2 world when you look at sort of advertising, which, as we sort of all know, is the fundamental business model for sort of a lot of this Web 2 social media companies.
Yeah, I've just in my own life, I've taken to, whenever I shop online now, I just go into private mode because I don't want those ads to follow me for the next like 3 years of my life.
Yeah, and
So
it's sometimes you have people who, they're like, oh, I said something, and then, is my phone listening to me? Is my computer listening to me? Then I saw some relevant ad. And more often
yeah,
than not, that's not the case. It's you visited a site, and that's why you're seeing that ad. Maybe they're retargeting you. Maybe they sort of have established that you like, a lot of baseball content, and that there's it's more so that it's sort of the data that's being mined on you as opposed to your device listening to you.
yeah, I get that, but it's still a very eerie feeling, isn't it? Like,
Absolutely.
yeah, not a pleasant experience.
So the analogy is there, right? You have sort of markets that are huge, that have the potential to be huge. There's a fair amount of opacity when you look at the chain in which ads are served. There are just so many players that are taking a piece of the ecosystem, if you will.
Yeah,
And it's kind of similar in the crypto world, I would say. So large markets, kind of opaque, and yeah, there are just many similarities to me. The guy who led product, sort of, I think, as Chainalysis saw tremendous growth, for example, he since has moved on, but I believe his John Dempsey, that's correct. I've sat down and had lunch with him, but he actually comes from an ad tech background as well. And, he and I had a long discussion. This was when he was first entering the kind of the Web3, or back then they just called it kind of crypto, if you will, space.
hmm
And yeah, I think it was a really great hire, I think, on behalf of the folks at Chainalysis, because I think bringing somebody who has developed real products in the ad tech world, crypto, you may have somebody who got in on Bitcoin or Ethereum really early. They don't have a lot of professional experience, but now all of a sudden they think that they can be giving, professional advice, right?
yeah,
I think crypto, when you have people who have actually executed in, people who are adults, basically, who have done stuff in their careers, the sad reality is that's kind of a rare breed in the crypto ecosystem or the Web3 ecosystem.
yeah. And I guess I would say, at least with crypto, there is the possibility of a more peer-to-peer ecosystem. So you don't have the possibility for all these intermediaries, kind of each taking a cut. Do you feel that? Are we too early for that, or do you feel like that is at least some of the promise of what Web3 is espousing?
No, I mean, it's certainly part of the promise, right? And not sort of be not earning anything from having our data being mined, right? But sort of being compensated, if you will, either for content creation or for sharing our data with folks who want to kind of use it to crunch data, whether it's for ads or other purposes. Currently, for me, the trade-off is clear. Like, we want free content. You kind of have to maybe give up some of the data, perhaps, but this is a whole sort of separate discussion, right? When you look at sort of media and the publishing sort of industry, is it better to have subscriptions? Is it better to kind of just sell direct sponsorships and then sort of backfill with AdSense or
Yeah,
something else, right? It's kind of a separate discussion, I would say.
yeah. The old adage is, if it's free, then you're the product, right?
Correct.
And I don't think many people actually understand how insidious that can be.
Yes.
So, okay, so from ad tech, and having experience in the financial world, rating CMBS. Like, where at that point in your life, where do you think you're heading, and what's exciting to you then?
In 2013, I started kind of doing my own thing, if you will, and that was just consulting with early stage startups. I had a friend who had just gotten into Y Combinator, with sort of a legal tech focused company, and I was working with them sort of on the marketing side, sort of spanning strategy to really sort of doing the execution, trafficking ad tags, if you will, the really not sexy sort of work. And I really enjoyed sort of being somebody who can offer a fairly full suite of services, A to Z when it comes to sort of digital marketing stuff, and in understanding different business models. So startups, like I mentioned, really interested me. At this time, I kind of knew that I wanted to start one myself. I was probably a little bit scared, maybe scared of failing. So instead, I kind of opted to consult for a bunch of startups. In 2015, I sort of dove headfirst into live mobile video streaming. There was an app that sort of was incredibly buzzy at South by Southwest, called Meerkat. It ended up pivoting later into something called House Party, which got acquired. So Meerkat predated Periscope, and it's this mobile live streaming kind of participatory experience. So all that's required is your phone. You can broadcast to one to many, to people across the world, and they can interact with you by typing sort of, there was like a chat section at the bottom, so they can ask you a question. I sort of hacked an audience of close to 100,000 followers across these sort of two live streaming apps. So I first started on Meerkat. Shortly thereafter, Twitter acquired Periscope, and I never wanted to kind of like be a content creator myself. I was just really bullish on live mobile streaming. I thought it was the future, and I wanted to sort
So
of
what were
ingest.
you talking about? Like, what was your focus? Like, what was your specialty, or what? Obviously, people responded to it, but what was the message you were putting out there?
I wasn't trying to sell people stuff, as is the case with, I think, a lot of these new media channels. They kind of initially become flooded with marketers and with coaches, people trying to sell you stuff. I just walked around New York and sort of gave people tours. The first 50 streams I did, I didn't even show my face. Yeah, I always joke that I've got a face for radio. Here we're doing this podcast, and I requested sort of audio only. I don't really like being on video. I have sort of this aversion to it. So, I kind of became this accidental content creator, and it was because I really wanted to roll my sleeves up and understand live mobile participatory video from the creator perspective. And before sort of building an analytics solution, let's say that's going to be, Meerkat had an API. Presumably, I thought Periscope/Twitter would make a lot more of this data available. And, I really sort of saw social media evolving back then in this direction where each platform, so LinkedIn, Instagram, and this ended up coming to fruition. They all added sort of, live video, let's say, as a feature because they already have this existing network.
Mm-hmm.
If you're trying to create a new network with pairing it with sort of this new medium, if you will, that's fairly difficult. So, and for that reason, or at least in part, Twitter shut Periscope down as sort of this standalone app. Periscope had sort of their own community associated with it, but it didn't really make sense because when people are putting time into creating content, they want to maximize, or it depends what your motives are, I suppose, right? But generally speaking, a lot of people want to maximize the reach of their content.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you look at sort of a lot of these decentralized social networks that are trying to compete with, let's say, a Twitter, I don't think that many of them are faring so well, simply because it's tough to compete with these network effects. Maybe a new shiny object comes out, you go join it, but shortly thereafter, I think people end up going back to, the dumpster fire that is Twitter.
Yeah, tell me about it. I'm trying to create my own network with Decentral, and it is definitely an uphill battle when you're kind of starting from scratch and trying to build an audience. But hey, everybody, go to decentral.io.
So going back to this live video stuff, I became this accidental, content creator, and I really hate the word, influencer. But I was doing sort of, quote, influencer work pretty early on. I was hired, for example, by by Heineken, or more specifically their PR agency Edelman, to kind of create content at the Rio Olympics from the Holland Heineken house. And this was, like 2016, right? So this is pretty early, I would say, as it relates to sort of when a lot of influencer marketing work became more of the norm. Long story short, what ended up happening was, after sort of investing a lot of time and frankly a lot of money as well, in a lot of the content that I was creating around New York, I would have to pay for these experiences, and I did so. An example being going to the observation deck at the Empire State Building, or sort of going on one of these double-decker buses, and sort of offering tours to people. To me, it was an easy justification, because I was just trying out all sorts of different types of content, different lengths of content. I knew, for example, that if I went to Times Square at 4 p.m., I would gain this many followers, versus if I went at 2 a.m., and sometimes I would do that because I wanted to build a global audience, I would gain this many followers. So to me, it was sort of, I tried to kind of really break this stuff all down into sort of like a science, if you will. And so, yeah, I put time into this, I put money into this. And what ended up happening was, you talked about community earlier, and what you're building at DeCent. And because I sort of, unlike many of the content creators who would broadcast a lot as opposed to viewing the streams of other content creators and really forging relationships with people, I would go into their streams. I would encourage people to, people reach out to me for advice, and I would often amplify the sort of content of new streamers. So I would help other people on Periscope and Meerkat kind of discover new streamers. A lot of people in that community sort of, really appreciated how I was helping them out, if you will, right? So they often would also reach out to me if they kind of had noticed a new streamer, or, a new feature or whatever. I was sort of a hub, if you will. And a lot of Periscope users started reaching out to me saying, hey, here's a link to a stream, or here's sort of this account that is going into all of these sort of streams of children who aren't supposed to be on the app first and foremost. I think their terms of service is was 18 at the time. You basically had, a lot of people coming to me saying, hey, Geoff, there are a bunch of pedophiles on this app preying on children. I've seen some really disturbing things, and I just want to put this on your radar, because, I would often tweet about things Periscope related, whether it's a new feature or something like this even, right?
Yeah.
So I started becoming very vocal on Twitter, tagging Periscope execs, really trying to sort of get them to, they had some features in the app that actually made it easier for pedophiles to find children to prey on. And they did this despite multiple users telling them about it. So I worked with BBC in the UK on an investigation. Slate covered it here in the US as well. But I was actually discussing some of this stuff during a live broadcast. And in the middle of the stream, Periscope, which is owned by Twitter, they pulled the plug on me. They suspended my account. And to me, that was sort of like when I really just reflected on and realized the power that, the leaders, if you will, at these centralized social media companies have. They can really, not transparently and with zero accountability, remove people. And this can truly kind of impact one's livelihood. And in this particular case, I had just started doing, some really interesting influencer deals at the time. I was close to closing a deal with a large brand that involved creating a weekly series for them. And all of a sudden, I couldn't do these things anymore.
Yeah. And it's not even a gatekeeper role, right? Because gatekeeping kind of implies at least some sort of fairness, maybe. There's a power dynamic to a gatekeeper. But here, you were trying to expose the dark side of what was capable on this platform, and it should have led to measures put in place so that couldn't occur anymore. And instead, they take you off the platform for, exposing how they're letting pedophiles, find new targets, which I find just disgusting and shocking.
Fortunately, I have many thoughts rather on Elon's Twitter, but one thing I quite appreciate is how Elon, at least publicly, seems to be making it a priority to kind of, clean up things in that regard. Children being sort of abused on this platform, which is great.
And so What did that experience leave you with when you had, you were experimenting and you were, like you said, trying to take a scientific approach to how to build an audience? You were very successful at it. You were getting deals, sponsorships and things that, you're making a career out of it. And then, like you said before, you were rugged by Twitter. I mean, I guess the original rug was Periscope, but coming out of that experience, how did that change you? And how did you pivot from that?
So when I was rugged by Periscope, frankly, it left me quite pissed at Twitter. And, you know, basically we're talking now summer of 2017, and maybe a few months prior to that time, maybe closer to a year, somebody had sent a bunch of fake followers to my Twitter account. So I think one thing that people may often don't realize is, let's say if I want to send a bunch of fake followers to your account, Matt, it's really easy for me to do it. You go on Google, you sort of, search for buy Twitter followers, and, you'll get a bunch of results, and you can send them anywhere. It doesn't require you being logged into your own account to accept followers, right? So I was quite annoyed that somebody had sent a bunch of fake followers to my account, and, most people may actually be happy about this. They appear more popular, right? But for me,
Right.
I was working as this content creator, and in theory, it could have been some other content creator, some other streamer on Periscope who may be pitching the same agencies, the same brands as myself, and this is just sort of the rationale that I had, right? It could be different for somebody else, and I thought I want to kind of have a clean audience.
Yeah,
What
you
if
want it to be
somebody is
organic, right? I
yeah?
mean,
What if somebody is
it's
going to
really
say, hey,
important.
look, like this individual, like, yes, this is different. This is his Twitter followers, but overnight he gained 10,000 Twitter followers. That's like a proxy for character. Is this the person that you would like sort of representing your brand? And I didn't really want that. So I reached out to some folks who I knew at Twitter and said, hey, look, somebody sent all these fake followers my way. Like, you guys are supposed to kind of have systems in place that kind of, mitigate the removal of these kind of, these inauthentic accounts, if you will. And the person said, oh, kind of don't worry about it. Like, over time, that'll kind of like just reduce itself to zero. I didn't want to push sort of back too hard, I guess. But when I got suspended from Periscope, I kind of emerged with this like, okay, like I know Twitter is committing massive advertising fraud and has been for years. Again, I have this background in ad tech. There's a ton of fraud in ad tech. So that's another similarity to the Web3 kind of ecosystem between there and ad tech that I didn't mention earlier. But, these kind of nascent and emerging spaces are often wrought with fraud, right? So I knew Twitter was committing massive ad fraud, and I wanted to sort of like really highlight that, hey, like Twitter says that they have systems in place that are going to remove all these inauthentic accounts, but reality is it's kind of not happening. So
Well,
what I ended up doing,
they want the
go ahead.
followers to be inflated, right? That actually benefits Twitter as a platform. Is it as easy as that? As simple as that?
So it's I think something that many don't realize is, so let's say when Twitter and Facebook, or Meta still is a public company, Twitter no longer is, but let's go back to the time when Twitter was a public company, sort of sharing their financials with Wall Street every quarter, right?
Hmm.
Twitter absolutely, and Twitter's CFO has full control over what that looks like, and here's precisely why. So Twitter currently, or recently at least, has stated that they remove more than 1 million inauthentic accounts per day. So now we're talking about a pool of new accounts on a monthly basis of, at least 30 million. On a quarterly basis, we're talking about 90 million now, right?
Yeah.
So depending on how aggressive or conservative, if you will, of let's call it a scrub that they apply to this pool of inauthentic accounts, right? You can massage the books. Like, you have full control over what you're reflecting to Wall Street, such that your story is always going to reflect number go up.
Yeah. So you've dealt with Jack Dorsey's Twitter when he was still there, and then now you're dealing with Elon Musk's Twitter. What kind of compare and contrast them to me? You've mentioned you laud them for trying to clean up some of these inauthentic accounts, but I'd be really curious from your inside perspective how the management of the two Twitters kind of compares.
There were many people who felt like Twitter was going to collapse all of a sudden because Elon came in and, just with really drastic changes. I don't know the exact numbers, but let's just say maybe it was 8,000, 9,000 employees and down to maybe 2,500, 2,000 or something. But like, I think what a lot of people maybe aren't fully realizing is they may think Twitter is a tech company. Twitter is not a tech company. Twitter is a media company. Twitter has and has had a large sort of services-oriented team that's dealing with, Madison Avenue here in New York, right? The big brands who are spending on there and their advertisers. Twitter's tech notoriously is known to not be so good. Twitter has, messed up acquisitions at a massive scale historically. Look at Vine, for example. I would say Periscope as well.
And how hard can it be to get an edit button on a tweet? I mean, come on.
Correct. I mean, I think sort of like, obviously I realize that's something that a lot of people have been asking for a while, but it could have, grave impacts when it comes to the information integrity on the platform, with regards to people changing their tweets after the fact and sort of how you're logging all the changes and these sort of things. So I think it's not necessarily such a simple issue. But so your initial question, comparing Jack's Twitter to Elon's Twitter, and it's very simple. Twitter was a dumpster fire before, and Twitter still is a dumpster fire. I think Elon's discussion around, really wanting to sort of do societal good in purchasing Twitter, I don't buy that. I think if Elon wanted to do societal good, he would just, and some people think he is burning this thing to the ground, but I think if Elon truly wanted to do societal good, he would just shut this thing down because it causes tremendous harm to society.
Yeah.
I think, ultimately, and I think there are some great things about sort of Elon in that he's obviously visionary when it comes to sort of the business world. He doesn't have a lot of experience sort of working on social networks. I mean, he tweets a lot and he's active, but I think he hasn't necessarily thought through a lot of the more sort of nuanced issues, and particularly around things like platform manipulation. I think, unfortunately, people kind of use words like, or use things like misinformation and disinformation rather than platform information. And I really don't like how a lot of my colleagues have positioned themselves, let's say, as misinformation experts or disinformation experts. And I would push back and hope that many of them would instead think of themselves as folks who focus on platform manipulation, because, these platforms have rules, and it doesn't matter if the content is true or not. What matters is, are these behavioral rules, these behavioral mechanisms sort of being violated? So in the context of Twitter, Matt, you could tweet something that is factually correct. So it has nothing to do with misinfo or disinfo, right? But if a bunch of fake accounts, a bunch of troll accounts, a bunch of sock puppets, some bots included even perhaps, are retweeting your content that's factually correct, that is a violation of the Twitter rules. It has nothing to do with the content. When you start opening up the discussion around sort of, is this misinfo? Is this disinfo? I'm an expert in sort of gauging truth. To me, it just all seems really silly. And it also kind of really politicizes the issue. When instead, if you just focus on these behavioral mechanisms, I think that's much more interesting.
Yeah. And let's get into some more of that misinformation that you have combated over time, because it does have real world consequences. There was the situation in the North Carolina town that had, was it Raleigh?
Yeah. So, and this is, for those listening, I first connected with Matt, I believe in 2019. We grabbed sort of lunch here in New York. And this was when Matt was starting to write his book. And Matt included sort of this piece about these North Carolina accounts, his book, into the ether. That's correct, Matt?
Out of the ether.
Sorry, out of the ether.
It's okay.
I apologize there.
Yeah.
So Matt kind of included this North Carolina story in his book. And what was happening was, this was 2018. And I found sort of a family of accounts, if you will, on Twitter that were falsely representing the state of North Carolina and various North Carolina municipalities. So there was a Greensboro one, a Raleigh one, and several others. The Greensboro inauthentic account, for example, like the real one maybe was just like, Greensboro, and the fake one was sort of Greensboro _NC. I'm sort of paraphrasing here. I don't remember the exact details. I've seen so many of these flavors of manipulation, but what ended up happening was via using tactics that violate Twitter rules. So following accounts in mass that on the opposite side, so these accounts themselves had a script to follow back any follow requests that they received. These sort of accounts that were seeking to falsely represent the state of North Carolina and various North Carolina municipalities actually had accumulated audiences on Twitter that, to the casual observer, were much larger than the official accounts, right?
Right.
Many people aren't realizing that this was done sort of through these mechanisms that I just described.
The fake account had 250,000 followers, and the real one had 20,000 followers. And
Correct.
The fake account would tweet something like 1,000,000 times, and the real account was tweeting, tens of thousands of times. And so yeah,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And this fake North Carolina account, because you know how on Twitter you're viewing a profile and it'll kind of show you, hey, this account is like also followed by these people. So like quite literally hundreds of the people that I was connected to on Twitter were following this fake North Carolina account.
Yeah.
So it's
And then what they would do is they were very insidious, right? They would post things about like, oh, here's what's going on around Raleigh. Here's like a new restaurant that's opened, or, here's a news story that's real. But then they'd weave in this misinformation and disinformation into that. So that was kind of the insidious part of it. I
wouldn't even necessarily, say, Matt, that it was, mis or disinformation that they were kind of weaving in, but rather they would kind of condition you to expect content. Hey, there is, hyper local content, right? They would tag a museum. There's this new exhibit. They would, have foot soldiers. Somebody would be there to take photos of stuff. And, they would tag, let's say, that local venue. That local venue has legit local followers. Maybe they retweet it. And all of a sudden, sort of these inauthentic accounts start to get real followers that kind of are from, these various hyper local kind of communities, right? And what they sort of then would do is, as you mentioned, they were very actively kind of pushing out content. But maybe like every 10th, every 15th tweet, they may have sort of like a conservative article that they would post. Again, it wasn't necessarily mis or disinformation, but they were kind of conditioning you to expect a certain kind of content. And once they got you in as a follower, it's psyops. They would sort of try to put content in front of you that they wanted to maybe over time try to impact your political views, or, that's the sort of thing that was taking place there.
And then on a much larger scale, and maybe of more importance here, was what's been happening for years in Iran with the official accounts or fake accounts, and how they're trying to sway political beliefs, right, and elections. And can you just kind of take it from tell us what's been going on with Iran for the last several years?
Sure. So Iran is no different than the rest of the world in that at this point, you have sort of like the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for every country, and many of them sort of like view their job as sort of like brand marketers for Canada or brand marketers for the UK, right?
Yeah, right.
And sort of what happens is a lot of the tactics that marketers have used to manipulate social media platforms have now sort of really penetrated government agencies, such that it's sort of the norm that most governments, whether through their Ministry of Foreign Affairs or through other kind of agencies, are probably running some sort of offensive platform manipulation. And oftentimes they're even targeting their own citizens. And this is sort of stuff that we've seen both through the Twitter files, but also through, I think it was in maybe October. Let me just sort of double check this here. But there's this sort of September, in fact, there's a Washington Post article that's titled "Pentagon Opens Sweeping Review of Clandestine Psychological Operations. Complaints about the U.S. military's influence operations using Facebook and Twitter have raised concern in the White House and federal agencies." So you know how the Pentagon sort of has been called upon, let's say, to audit groups like CENTCOM around what they're doing in this regard. So, many of them say that they're simply doing this stuff to champion and it's not just specific to the U.S. again, right? To champion their own country's interests, but the reality is,
Well, yeah,
in
you
many
could flip
cases,
it and use the Russian example in the 2016 election with what they did, right? That was in the Russian interest, but it wasn't in the U.S. interest, I guess, is what I would just say.
yeah. So I mean, a lot of this stuff is, and it's the same thing with sort of like, tech that is maybe supposed to be used to track bad guys. Oftentimes, some of this you can refer to it as like surveillance tech. If authoritarian regimes get a hold of it, they're often using it not just to track the bad guys, but to monitor everybody else. And that's rather problematic, I would say. On the whole Russia sort of situation, I think that, I do think that Russia and other countries have played an impact sort of in US politics. But I think that the unfortunate thing is, from the US perspective, most people seem to think that, quote, Russia bots, sort of, that they equate that with platform manipulation. So the reality is, like, platform manipulation extends well beyond sort of Russia's influence, but also like it impacts just every country basically at this point. And sort of bots have become this catch-all phrase for everything, whether it's like a troll account, which is actually operated by a human. So it's not sort of a bot. A bot just means like a fully automated account. Everything, there's sort of just been this like reduction to Russian bots. And I think that does sort of a big disservice to the much broader ecosystem of that exists around platform manipulation.
Yeah. And wasn't the Russian security agency, the FSB, weren't they kind of implicated in some of that manipulation as well? So not a bot, but something that is, very close to the Kremlin and had an objective in mind.
Correct. I don't recall the acronym you're mentioning, to be honest, but like there's sort of like, these IRA kind of troll farms.
Yeah, okay. That's the predecessor of the KGB.
Got it.
Yeah.
So we talked about earlier how this stuff can have, real world impact. And we talked about sort of this North Carolina case. And by the way, the sort of social media manager from one of these municipalities. So Twitter didn't remove any of this stuff when I tagged their execs sort of in threads online that would get shared by a lot of journalists and get some good traction. Instead, they opted to block me. Easier to hide your head in the sand, I suppose. However, there was sort of a local media outlet that covered this stuff. And as a result, maybe a day or two later, Twitter removed these accounts. And this piece got a quote from the social media manager from one of the municipalities that was being impersonated. And this guy straight up said, like, we've been trying to get into touch for Twitter for the longest time. We had no success. We really don't want people sort of to think that, this is the sort of content that we as a municipality are championing. And this person, to no avail, were they able to get Twitter to do this. It wasn't until media pressure that Twitter sort of actually changed.
Yeah. And again, it's about having an organic content like feed, right? You always want your social media presence to reflect who you are. You don't want to have somebody take it over from you and put out stuff that you would never put out. So
correct. So going back to the Iran and sort of I want to kind of refocus around that, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
So another piece there that's quite interesting is, and sort of just one more point here on a real world impact, and then I can really give a quick overview of the Iran social media scene more broadly. So there's this account on Twitter called Heshmat Alavi, Heshmat, last name Alavi. So Heshmat Alavi has had pieces published sort of in various like op-ed sections for well-known publications, Forbes, The Hill, and others, if you will, right? It turns out that this sort of Heshmat Alavi like doesn't exist. The Intercept did a great investigation on it. I kind of gave them some data when they reached out that really just kind of showed that this Heshmat Alavi account, not that it wasn't a real person, but rather that it engages in platform manipulation. So, to really kind of hammer this point across about the real impact of this stuff, the Intercept piece done by Murtaza Hussain, fantastic reporter. In this piece, he opens up by sort of talking about how there's sort of this like meeting at the Pentagon, right, where some government person is kind of asked to justify a certain foreign policy decision that was made, and as a result, to like the reporters, they quote an article by Heshmat Alavi.
Wow.
So like that's like really ridiculous as far as I'm concerned. And this account sort of is still active on Twitter. after this, I would say, pretty explosive investigation by The Intercept, Twitter suspended the account for like a week. And then this account was mysteriously sort of reinstated. Meanwhile, my account was suspended for several years because I was reported by bad actors for calling out their manipulation.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you that specifically. Was it the stuff you did on Iran that led you to being suspended on Twitter, or was it like a combination of things? Or
Yeah, my account was, mass reported by bad actors spanning from, folks who were trying to manipulate the platform in more, geopolitical sort of flavors to crypto folks, sort of like the XRP army would often mass report my account. And, the reality is sort of like XRP arm kind of created the standard, if you will, but not for sort of like, simplifying, payments, if you will. Instead, they kind of have created the standard for like these online armies. Now you kind of have this across the ecosystem very broadly. You have Bitcoin-centric inauthentic accounts. You have ETH-centric inauthentic accounts for like a bunch of these layer twos, for all of these NFT projects. It's effectively gotten to a point where you're looking to launch something and you kind of have like as a line item on your budget, like you kind of just know that you're going to have to throw some funds at it to create this fake community on Twitter, on Telegram. Nothing we sort of see online is we should be taking at face value.
yeah, the XRP army came after me when I was reporting on them for Bloomberg, and it wasn't too bad, but it did piss me off because what they did was somebody signed me up for every email newsletter that you
Oh
can
man.
imagine around the world in like different languages, and like so my inbox at Bloomberg just became completely unusable. It was more of an annoyance, but it did.
Yeah,
I guess I
they
felt like
succeeded in getting my LinkedIn account suspended, the XRP army.
yeah, they're pretty effective. But that brings me to like we write about this a little bit in the book. About what can be done about this. And I know you've got somewhat mixed feelings about, crypto or Web3 or a blockchain based system for a social media platform. Has your thinking changed at all since I think we probably spoke in 2020 or 2019, somewhere around there? Do you see solutions here with the blockchain or?
Yeah, I think things like Lens protocol, having a social graph that is portable, that's like really great in theory. But coming from the perspective of like, so, Lens has a bunch of great folks kind of working on building the protocol there and, building out partnerships and stuff. One of the people I've been in touch with there is a former Twitter data scientist. And he kind of, helped me make sure that I had all of the data properly and was understanding it all to kind of map out. This was several months ago, to map out the social graph for all of the Lens profiles. And, what I quickly sort of saw was that you have basically the same folks who have already established an infrastructure of fake accounts to disseminate content across Web2 social networks. They've already started sort of building a similar infrastructure layer across Web3 social, decentralized protocols like Lens in this case, right? So I kind of brought this up to them, and from their perspective, they view things, at least my understanding of it was, they view things as sort of, they want to allow the application layer to kind of come in and, it's akin to sort of some folks who say like, let's have Twitter sort of like have a bunch of different sort of algorithms that sort of determine what content you're going to see, and the users can pick which one they want, right? So the same thing with like Lens protocol. If you're sort of assuming that at the application layer, they're going to have tooling that's going to sort of allow that the information integrity is not sort of like being disrupted by bad actors, that's a lot of faith, a lot of trust to be putting into your application layer. And while I understand that these are supposed to be decentralized protocols, I think you kind of have to draw a line in the sand somewhere. And, it's one thing when you have maybe just 100,000 or 200,000, profiles, whether it's on Lens or Farcaster or, any of these other folks who are trying to build decentralized sort of Twitter competitors, right? You have to start thinking about these issues now versus when you have, let's say 100 million users. So I think you're going to have many of the same problems that sort of Web 2 is faced by. Just making something decentralized doesn't all of a sudden alleviate some of these problems.
Well, you're kind of talking about reputation, right? Like you can have a reputation from what you've been putting out and like I guess like your network and people can attest to you. But if I'm hearing you correctly, it sounds like that can just be gamed as well.
Correct. So if there isn't any safeguards in place at the protocol level, this is just my opinion, to mitigate against sort of the creation of accounts that aren't, let's say, maybe like one-to-one, or accounts that don't exist sort of as this single purpose to kind of disrupt the information integrity on your platform. If you're not mitigating against this stuff, then at the application layer, it's just putting too much trust that these folks are going to care about having the tooling in place to sort of remove this. So you have to, I think, have a bit more friction, some KYCing, if you will. I don't know the exact solution, right? But I just don't think that the account creation process, and of course, there is more friction because you have to sort of have, in the case of many of these, let's say, you have to be familiar with things like Ethereum, right? And that is a friction point to sort of versus just putting in an email to create an account, right? But you still have bad actors who are already trying to sort of establish an infrastructure of fake accounts to, manipulate sentiment across these platforms.
So with that, before we wrap up, tell me what you're doing with social forensics and where the idea for your company came from and what you guys are doing in this space.
Sure. So Social Forensics is an online analytics firm that uses social graphs to better understand communities, influence, and the spread of information across social media platforms. And taking a step back, it's a really similar exercise. For example, the way that we are visualizing the connections within somebody's social graph, right? So arrows kind of coming in, arrows coming out, that can be analogous to a blockchain, payments going to and payments going from, right? It's a very sort of similar exercise. And prior to starting Social Forensics, I co-founded with what was a former sort of friend of mine, wrestling teammate from college. I think often, as can be the case with startups, is these things are really sort of intense, and it's not too uncommon for people to kind of butt heads, if you will, and friends often can have falling outs, right? So Elementis, they raised around a capital sort of, recently, I think valuing them at like $160 million. Again, I haven't been involved with the company for years at this point, but it's a very similar exercise. So I kind of, after looking into the fake followers that were bought to my Twitter account, and I actually hired what was my co-founder at Elementis, Max, to kind of visualize that network. That's what sort of got us thinking that, hey, we should maybe try to do similar stuff in the blockchain sphere, because it's kind of a similar problem, right? You can think of blockchain as a public data layer in the same way that Twitter is kind of effectively, or at least historically, has been kind of effectively a public data layer because of how they make their data available, much more so than other social media platforms. The problem is this data is not sort of presented to the user in a way that makes sense often. So I think social
so you're
forensics,
there to interpret it and visualize it and show people like this is what I'm saying by manipulation, or this here you can see the fake accounts are all coming from here.
correct. And I think I think at some point in the future we're going to see sort of emerging of firms that are doing sort of blockchain forensics, blockchain analytics, with firms that are doing social media analytics and social media forensics, because I don't want to sort of get into all of the details just here, but I think there are a good number of synergies that exist between that. Sort of when you're looking at blockchain activity, sort of scraping social data and really understanding social media networks and sort of the data structure there and whatnot can sort of really augment the blockchain data when it comes to investigations.
Yeah. Fascinating. Geoff, this has been a really, really interesting and eye-opening conversation. Thank you so much for all your openness and telling us your story. Tell people how they can find you if they want.
Sure. So my parents opted to give people two opportunities to mess up the spelling of my name. So you can find me on Twitter at Geoff, and that's not Jeff, but rather Geoff. And my last name is Golberg, but that's Golberg without the letter D in it. So it's Geoff, Geoff, Golberg, Golberg. And I'm also on Medium under the same handle. You can sort of see, I think I have maybe 50 or so posts going back to maybe 2018 of sort of me documenting various flavors of social media manipulation.
Yeah, I definitely check it out. It's fascinating stuff, and Geoff has been fighting the good fight here for a long time. So Geoff, please keep it up, and again, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story with us. That's it for this episode. Thanks for joining us, and don't forget to rate and follow this show on Apple, Spotify, and Amazon Music. Decent People is a production of Decential Media. It is produced by Matt Bogart, with music by Brian Duncan and Kareem Imes.